Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Raf, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. So we're starting a new chapter. It says in the Torah, Me perot en machmitzin. So he says, right, that when it comes to fruit juice, it does not cause the dough to leaven. So what does that mean? That if you knead the dough with juice instead of water, it will not leaven. So he says, V'rabu b'zeh yadiyot, but he says there's a lot of opinions about this. What does that mean? לרש"י אין חייבים על החימוצה כרת אבל חמץ נוקשה הווה. According to Rashi, he says you're not really liable, to be cut off if you eat this kind of thing, but it is called a chametz nuksha. So what does that mean? It's like a quasi kind of chametz. ואפילו במי פירות לבדן אסור ללוש. So therefore, right, according to Rashi, you can't really do this, the lechatchila, to knead the dough with fruit juice. That's one opinion. According to the Rif, you're allowed to even do fruit juice and water together, like a mixture of the two of them. Right, from the first night onwards. But there are those that don't allow to knead with fruit juice and water together. Even Melel Rishon, even from the first night, Belach and onwards. אבל כיתוף שמכתב בהן העיסה בשעת עריכה מתירים. But he says the basting that you do, right, during when you're shaping the chalot, that they allow. Milel Rishon Belach, from the first night onwards. Veri Piresh, the Rish says, the meperot velo mayim en machmitzin. If you have fruit juice without water, it doesn't leaven well at all. Mutar lelush bahen, and therefore you're allowed to knead with them. Milel rishon velach, from the first night onwards. Aval belel rishon b'sheni, but he says the first night and the second night, en yotzim b'im yedech yuvat matzah. You can't fulfill your obligation with that kind of matzah. Why is that? The havale matzah ashira, because this is called rich matzah, right? Why is it called rich? Because obviously, right, poor people, they can't afford to knead their dough with fruit juice, right? That's too steep for them, right? That that kind of thing. So that's why it's called matzah shira. It's for rich people, who are spoiled. Okay. So goes on. So he says, what about mebetzim, right? What about egg yolks? Are you allowed to use, right, the eggs? In other words, yolks and whites, whatever. Raw eggs. Are you allowed to knead the dough with eggs? So Mistapik Rashi, right? Hayam Mistapik Rashi. Rashi had a doubt about this. Im machmitzin, if it leavens. Rabbeinu Tam haya matir, and Rabbeinu Tam allows this. Ulezeh eskim Adoni Aver Rosh Sal. So the Rosh also agrees with that. Ume perot im mayim have chametz nuksha. But right, if you're using juice and water together, that's called like a quasi chametz nuksha. So it's forbidden. But there's no cutting off there. אבל ממהר להחמיץ יותר משריצה, but it says it does the leavening process goes faster in a case like that. What does that mean? Well, you're using right the water and the juice together, it goes faster even, leavens faster. But it leavens to a lesser degree. That's something else. So he says, Hilkach, therefore, en lalush bahem. So right there, therefore you shouldn't need with with fruit juice and water together. ואם לש בהם פסק בהג, כרבי דאמר, יישרף מיד. So right, what about if you bid if you did need it like that? So the Bahag paskins like Rabban Gamliel that says that has to be burned right away. V'arit skiyat, but the rit skiyat, Zal pasak kechachamim. He passed it to chachamim. Damre yafe miyad. You should bake it right away. Says bake it right away. And the Rosh also agrees with that. Okay, good. So that's we did a lot of the tour here. So let's go over to Bet Yosef and catch up a little bit.
Kavod Harav, who
Yeah.
the Rosh agreed that it's you bake it right away when it has been kneaded with fruit juice and water. And who else was it?
Yes, that's
And
it.
just the Rosh agreed with his opinion?
Yeah, that's what we said, right? He agrees with that. That b'diavad, you can bake it right away. So why is that? Because if you bake it right away, it won't have a chance to leaven.
Okay, thank you.
That's pretty much the story. Okay, good. So that's the story there. Now let's see Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this. Perek Kol Hashar, right? This is the source in the Gemara. Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna bar Bachana. Amar Reish Lakish. Isa shenilosha bayain v'shemen v'dvash en chayavim ala chimutza karet. And so he says, right, that if you need the dough with these types of liquids, what are we talking about? Wine and or oil or honey. So there's no cutting off here with this kind of thing. Mishum dehavele met perot, because these are like types of like juices, whatever. Met perot and machmitzin, and the juices do not leaven. Piresh Rashi beyain b'shemen, right? Regarding what we just said, right? That if you're using wine or honey, velonatan b'mayim, right? So Rashi says, what are we talking about here? They didn't put any water there. He didn't add any water, just only wine and oil, right? One or the other, right? Velonatan b'mayim. Ubatar hachi Tanya. It says afterwards we learned the Braita, Lamed Vamud Aleph, en lashin isa bepesach beyain v'shemen udvash. So it says, right, that we don't need on Passover a dough using wine or oil and or honey. Veim lash, and if he did so, Rabban Gamliel omer tisaref v'miyad, right? Rabban Gamliel says it should be burned right away. The Chachamim omrim ye'achel, right? And the Chachamim say you can eat that. So, I mean, in general, right? The rule is we go like the majority, So therefore, the halacha is like the Chachamim, obviously. Usually, that's the way it is. Usually, we'll see. So anyway, let's go on. אמר רבי עקיבא שביתי הייתה אצל רבי אליעזר ורבי יהושע ולשתי להם עיסה ויין ושמן ודבש ולא אמרו לי דבר. Right, so he says that says Rabbi Akiva, right, that he was my daughter was, with these rabbis, right, the Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and he says I kneaded the dough using these kinds of liquids, right? Wine, oil, and right honey, as we said. So he says they didn't tell me nothing, right? So what does that mean? They had no problem with that, right? They didn't object. ואף על פי שאין נשים בו, מקטפין בו. So it says even though we don't knead with it, but we do baste with it. Atan Tana Kama. So that's already like the first opinion. החכמים אומרים אין עת שלשים בו מקטפין בו. So the rabbis say no, you can't differentiate. If you can knead with it, you can also baste with it, right? ועת שאין נשים בו, if you don't knead with it, you can't baste with it either. אין מקטפין בו. פירש Rashi explains, אין נשים איסה. Right? Rashi says that we don't, right, as we said, we don't knead the dough, shel matzot, for matzot, beyain v'shem dvash, with these three types of, right, liquids, right, honey and wine and oil. מפני שקרובה וממהד לחמיץ. Why is that? Because these things, says Rashi, right, they leaven quickly. ואין אדם יכול לשומרה. So it says, therefore, nobody can really guard that. You know, it's like it's out of control. ולמאן דאמר מפירות אין מחמיצין. So it says, according to the one who says that the right that fruit juice does not leaven. La kashya. So it says there's no difficulty here. דהיו אין חייבים על חימוצו כרת כאמר, לא הווה חימוץ כאמור, אבל חמץ נוקשה הווה. So what they're saying is, right, that it's not real chametz, but it's like sort of quasi chametz. So therefore, right, it's still a problem. Chachamim אומרים תוך תאכל, right? And the rabbis say you can eat that stuff. The kasavre efshar leshamra. So they hold, right, that what, that you can guard it, right? It is possible to guard that. It is possible to prevent it from leavening. V'lo garsinan miyad, and he says temishenefa lo tachamitz. And he says we don't have a text which says that, right? When you bake it right away, it will not leaven. Okay, let's go on. So he says, "Ve'arif gores v'chamim omrim te'afeh mi'ad." So the Rif has his text says like this, right? That the rabbis say it should be baked right away, and that's what we saw in the tour, right? If this happens, it should be baked right away. וכתב הר"ן, says the Ran, שנילושה ביין ושמן דבש, אין חייבים על חימוצה כרת. So it says if it was needed, right, with these three liquids that we mentioned, there's no cutting off here. Rashi explains, "B'shelon natan letocha mayim." What are we talking about? They didn't put water in there, right? If you didn't put water, there's no karet, there's no cutting off. The karet hu the en chayavin alav. But it says, okay, so there's no cutting off, but right, the mishum the me perot enam machmitzin, because fruit juice doesn't leaven. Aval nuksha mi hahabe, but it's called, right, nuksha. What does that mean, right? It's like quasi chametz kind of thing. Tanya, the common, as we learned later on, right, the Breita, en lashina ta'isa bayain, b'shemen vash. We don't need the dough with these three things. Ve'im lash, if he did so, tisaref. So one opinion again, right, says it should be burned. The alma meperot machmitzin. So according to that opinion, right, fruit juice does leaven, right? That's Rabban Gamliel. V'afilu Rabbanan de pligamu, right? And he says even the rabbis who argue with him, they right, they said you can eat it. That's only if they can guard it from leavening, right? Kesharisa, like any other dough. But he says in general, right, they admit that they do leaven. Mashma, if you're going to tell me that later on it's implied that en machmitzin, they don't leaven. We said the Vatika Share b'mishcha umilcha mishum dehave meperot. So it says these things are allowed, right? With oil and milcha, right, which is probably salt. Bishum de'ave meperot. No, no, whatever. It's something else. Anyway, it says it's fruit juice. These things. Okay. Ve'achinami mamina. That's what we say. Also say memon al Gabe achatzava de abishuna ve'gabe ha deshare lecharuche tere shibale behade hada de alma meperot en machmitzin. So he brings also another Gemara, right, which also proves that fruit juice doesn't leaven cloud at all. Therefore, it's allowed even lechatchila. Wow. Right, it says the Piresh Rabbeinu Tam. So therefore, Rabbeinu Tam explains the en machmitzin klal, that they don't leaven at all. Bifnei atzman, by itself. What does that mean by itself? Without adding any water. V'ainu hanhu desharinan. So it says those are the ones who allow lekaman that later on. Aval alidei mayim en chayavin al chimut sokaret. But it says if you use water, also you add water to it, so there's no cutting off, but aval nuksha mihave, but it's like a quasi chametz. Mimaher chimutza, and it's very quickly, right, leavens. V'ainu detane, that's what we learned in the Braita, v'im lash tisaref miyad, that if it was needed, right, like that, should be burned right away. V'achinami muchach v'perek kol menachot. That's the way it comes out also in this parak, it says, Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. The below mayim afilu nuksha lo have. So if there's no water, right, it's not even quasi chametz. Ad kan shano. V'chen katav gam ken harosh. The Rosh also says this. V'chen katav Rav Magid, also Rav Magid, Perkei b'shem Rav Mefarshim, in the name of most of the commentaries, right? V'arif katav mistabra lan ke Rabbi Akiva. So it says the Rif says we pass like Rabbi Akiva. Makes sense. Uvadai hach matnita b'shemen alidei mayim hu he. So he says, therefore, right, we have to explain that baraita that we mentioned is talking about oil with water. Alidei mayim mishnuya. Deha kituf shemen alidei mayim hu shelashin aisa. So it says that the basting, right? The oil, but with water, who shelashin ha'isa. That's how they knead the dough. And then they baste it. So he says the first opinion that forbade blisha for kneading, shara bekituf, he does allow basting. Rabbanan ase ben belisha ben bekituf. But the rabbis, right, forbid whether it's kneading or basting. The Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and since we see that this rabbi, they have a bata, that he was the last generation there. Abad Uvda, he did like Rabbi Akiva. He did like the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, practically speaking. Shma Amina the Hilchata Kevate halach. So you see from there halachas like Rabbi Akiva. Be'ashkechan miktzat rabata de ase. So he says we do find some of the rabbis that forbid ben belisha ben bekituf, whether it's kneading or basting, kirabanan, like the rabbis. Veika de miravata acharine de sharu, and there are some rabbis who allow ve'anan kitvinan mai desviranan. So it says we wrote whatever we think, right? We hold katav the katav alav rosh, as a rosh regarding that. The hashta lidbarav afilu me perot betarobet maim. So he says, according to him, even if you have fruit juice with water together, mixed with water, and machmitzin, it says they don't leaven. The kasher lidbarav midaminan. So he says, but there's a question about that, right? There's a contradiction, because what says in the Gemara, the Kaman lametet amud bet, right? The teka b'mayim umilcha asur b'mishcha umilcha share alma muchach behedia deme perot imach amayim. So he brings this Gemara and says the Rosh, right? According to this Gemara, you see that if you have fruit juice with water together, machmitzin, they do leaven. V'chen muchach hahi the minchat nesachim. So he says it's also right from a different Gemara you can learn this. Where is that? Menachot, Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Hilkach nireli kiravata de paske kechachamim. So he says, therefore, it seems to me that we should paskin like the chachamim, he says. The Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Aire Belo Maim. So he says that the story with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is talking about when there is no water used. The od nireli deleta lehai diuka shedikdek harif. So he says also, he says, I think that what the Rif tried to to deduce is not correct. The Dumya de Sharu Rabbanan Bekituf, that it resembles that what the rabbis permitted regarding basting. Dehainu alidei maim, with water, which means with water. The Ka'asru Belisha, that they forbade when it comes to kneading. The Efshar the Belisha Asur. So it's possible that when it comes to kneading, it's forbidden. Afilu en bo maim, even if there's no water in there. The Sfiralu, because they hold the meperot machmitzin, that they hold that fruit juice does leaven. Af belo ba maim, even without water. Kituv share, but basting is allowed. Ve'af alidei maim mishum de kituv. So he says even if you're using basting with water also together, the var mu'at, a little bit, it's a little bit, not a large amount, basting. Ve'en machmitz, therefore doesn't leaven. Rabbi Akiva de share lo share ela meperot lechudai belo maim. So he says, but Rabbi Akiva, who permitted, what did he permit? He permitted only with fruit juice without any additional water, right? That's what he permits. So that's how we paskin, by the way. That you should not use fruit juice with water, but you can use fruit juice by itself, right? So you know what that means for us, right? That if you use juice which is made from concentrate, that would be a problem because they add water to it, So that would be a problem. So you have to use, if you want to make matzot, right, with the fruit juice, first of all, right, number one, as we said, you can't fulfill your obligation for the mitzvah because it's called matzah shira, right, rich matzah. That's number one. Number two, but if you just want to eat it, because you like it, so then you got to remember, right, that don't add any water to it, and don't use concentrated, right? Don't use concentrated juice, right, because otherwise it's going to be a problem from concentrate because they add water to it. So you have to use freshly squeezed juice if you want to do that. Okay. Vedat Harambam. So what about the Rambam? What does he hold? Peg K, right? And over there he says Kedat Tarif. He holds like the Rif. Velona Hagu Ken, but he says with the custom is not like that. Katavarosh, Peg Elu of the over in the Rosh says Shemashe Pasak Arif. That was Rif Paskin. The Meperot en Machmitzin. That fruit juice doesn't leaven. Afilu al mayim, even with water together. Hainu le'inyan lishat ha'isa. That's only talking about kneading the dough. The ena memaheret le'chamitz. That it means that it's not quick to leaven. Ve'achol le'shamra mechimutz. So therefore, right, it says you can guard it from leavening. Kemo sharisa, just like any other dough. Aval hecha shahu. But he says he does agree that if it waited, if it was delayed, right, the time that it takes to leaven, which is 18 minutes, as we said, right? So then it's going to be a problem, right? It's going to leaven. So, okay. So he says, now, right, we have all the opinions down, right? We know exactly what they're saying, each opinion that Rabbeinu, right, the two are brought down here. Except this one, right, which she said that there are those who forbid to knead with fruit juice, together with water, but you're allowed to baste though, right? That's what he said. That's only if we say that the halacha is like the first opinion. That he said, right, that even though he said, right, that we can't knead with it, but we are allowed to, right, baste with it. The al-dat misha mefaresh, the had-tanya, and according to one who says, right, that that which we learned, right, that we shouldn't knead the dough. behind Hashem and Bidvash, right? With the wine, these three liquids, right? With the wine and the oil and the honey. But tarovet maim so they were talking about mixture with water. Deilu b'mei perot, but if you're just talking about right fruit juice below maim without any additional water, mutar lalush will be allowed. So in other words, right, pretty much that's the story. Okay, so it's a long story, a little bit confusing, right? But anyway, right. Bottom line is like this, right? After all has been said and done, that we go like the middle here, the middle approach, which is right that we don't say that fruit juice leavens by itself. That we don't say. So it does not leaven fruit juice. In other words, even if you leave it for a long time. But right, if you mix it with water, that's a very different story, right? That you shouldn't do. So it will leaven quickly, right? If you do that, even at a quicker rate. Okay, so we'll see the Shulchan Aruch, but I just want to see. I think there's more Bet Yosef here or something. Here, right? This one we got to do. So it says here. So he says that which Rabbeinu said, the Torah, to differentiate between right the first night and the other nights, right? What is that? What is that talking about? So if I remember correctly, right, the point was like this: that the first night when you're doing the mitzvah, so then you can't do it with matzah, right, which was made with the fruit juice. But the other nights, right, no problem, right, because you're not doing the mitzvah anymore. You're just eating, for the sake of eating, right? That's it. So that's okay. We know that we lived outside of Israel. We do 2 nights, right? So we have to do the second night, same thing, right, as the first night. So we do 2 nights, the Seder. So there we got to use, right, matzah, which was made with water only. But when it comes to the other days, right, that's what the Torah is saying over here. You can have, matzah ashirat, right, which is rich matzah, which is what? That it was made with fruit juice or, with wine or, anything like that, right? Or eggs, right? That's the famous thing in America, right? You can go to the store, and you'll see, right, egg matzah, right, which is made by Manischewitz or some other company, whatever it is, right? So the truth is, the Ashkenazim, they don't eat that stuff. So then why do they make it, right? For who are they making it? For us, for the Sephardim? I doubt it, right? So the truth is, right, that they're making it for people who are sensitive, about eating, hard matzah with water, made with water. So like, people who are old, and sick or whatever, or children, they give it to them, they allow them to have. But when it comes to just, somebody who's nice and healthy, the Ashkenazim, right, they don't eat that stuff. But we Sephardim, we do, right? So we have no problem with that. We can have, right, matzah shira, right, for Passover, egg matzah or whatever you want to call it, right? There's all kinds of other products that are made in Israel. All kinds of things that are made. They make also, by the way, cookies. That are made with wine, or grape juice, whatever it is, right? They make cookies like that, and they're very delicious. I mean, relatively speaking, right? For Passover, they're delicious. Because everything on Passover is like one step down when it comes to when it comes to taste, right? So, but those are really good, and the Sephardim are allowed to have it. The Ashkenazim don't eat that stuff, right? That's the thing. So, they bring it in from Israel. It's like an import because nobody really makes it here. Those cookies, they make them in Israel. Okay. Anyway, all right, that's the story. So let's see Bet Yosef here. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this. Pashut Sham, right? It's over there, right in the Gemara, Lamed Amud Aleph. Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ma Talmud Omar Alechem Oni, Prat Leisa Shenilosha Ben Yain B'Shemen. Right. So it says Rabbi Akiva, right, that you can't fulfill your obligation the first night, as we said, right, with matzah that was made with wine or oil or with right or with the honey, because this is matzah shira, it's rich matzah, right, and we need lechem oni, right, we need poor matzah, right, poor man's matzah. The devash Vinaminan the Katana, and they asked about this in the Gemara. Hi, Baraita, from this Baraita, Shalosh Haisa Bayan V'Shemen V'Ash, Umeshane, Ha Lo Kasha, Ha B'Yom Rishon, Ha B'Yom Sheni. So Gemara answers, right? Yeah, okay, there's a source also in the Talmud that says you're allowed to have matzah like that. So Gemara says, no problem, right? Yeah, okay, we can reconcile. Right? One is talking about the first night. The first night, right, when you're doing the mitzvah, you shouldn't eat that stuff, right? But the other nights, right, when you're right just eating, that's okay. You can have it, no problem. Okay, good. Let's go on. K'diyamar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, like this rabbi said, right? Livnei yoma kama lo talushu me li bechalva mikan ve'elach lo shuli bechalva. Vika de'amre. So this rabbi said, right? First night, don't give me that stuff. Second night, you can give me. Right? De'amar yoma kama. Vika de'amar yoma kama. Lo taloshu li bedusha. מכאן ואילך לא שודי בדושה, right? So the same thing. וכתב הראש פרק כמה כתובות, right? So it says ראש, first פרק of כתובות, דיומא כמה היינו סעודה כמה הייתה. So what is it talking about the first day? It's talking about, when you're doing the seder, right? That you got to have the real matzah, the real thing, right? Which is guarded matzah, and it's got to be made with water, as we said, right? Matzah שמורה, וגם בסוף מועד בקטן, also in end of מועד קטן, it says, כתב דהי יום טוב הראשון, היינו סעודה ראשון, that's talking about the first night, right? של לילה פסחים, וכאן הראשון, היינו סעודת ראשונה, וכאן הוא כתב יום ראשון, כלומר, לילה ראשון. So when it says the first day, it means the first night, right? In other words, the Seder night. ומשמע דאפילו בסעודת לילה הראשון, לא אימית אלא שלא לצאת בהם ידי חובת משום דבעינן לחם עוני, אבל שלא בתורת מצה דמצווה, אפילו בסעודת לילה ראשון ממלא כרסו ממנה. So he says another thing, right, which is that even though we said, right, that you can't do the mitzvah with this kind of matzah, but you can have it for your meal, right, even that night, like in other words, once you eat the matzah for the mitzvah, so then afterwards you can have anything you want, right, for the meal, that's no problem. Okay, good. Goes on, right? Mashma b'divrei Rashi. That's what also applies from Rashi. Shkatav yom rishon, laila rishon shem matzah chova bainan lehem lechemoni. So the same thing Rashi says as we just said, right? V'achi mashma mirashon Rabbeinu. So that's what it also implies in Rabbeinu, the Torah. V'chen katav Rav Magid, also this rabbi. V'lapuke meotam shenohagim shelo lechol matzah ashira klal. So he says this comes to exclude, right, those that don't eat matzah ashira at all, right? As we said, the Ashkenazim, they don't eat at all. בשני ימים ראשונים, right, even the first 2 days, ואף על פי שכתב הכל בו, נהגו שלא לעשות מצה עשירה כלל. He says, right, that the custom is they don't make at all מצה עשירה. בשני ימים ראשונים, the first 2 nights, דלא עתה לחלופי בא למיכל ומיכל מינה. So what's the reason why we don't make it the first 2 nights? Because you may come to mix it up with the regular matzah, and eat the wrong one for the mitzvah. מצוות חובה עד כאן השנה, אין טעם למנהג ההוא לאסור לגזור גזירה בדבר. So he says, but the Beit Yosef says, right, that there's no reason to be so stringent like that, to say, you may come to switch one with the other. The rabbis never decreed such things like this. So you're coming and making all kinds of, new decrees, right, which were never made by the sages. Okay, מנהג ההוא זה מגזר, בדבר שלא חששו לו, וחכמים האחרונים, ולא חכמים האחרונים. Good, very good. So let's go on. ואף על פי שגמרא לא אמרו דאם מצה עשירה, אלא ביום הקמה. Even though in the Talmud it says only, right, that it was excluded for the first night. וגם הריף והראש, also the Rif and the Rosh, כתבו, דמתניתא דשריה, מצה עשירה, right, that this Braita, which allows to eat מצה עשירה, אוקימנה ביום שני. We're talking about the second day. אבל ביום ראשון, but the first day, אפילו לרבי עקיבא, even according to Rabbi Akiva, not so, we're not allowed to have that, right, as we said. So this is all like repetition, basically, right? We're saying the same thing over and over. Just from different angles. Right? So again, he mentions what we just said, right? We just mentioned that. That depends where you live, right? If you live in Eretz Israel, it's only one Seder night, right? But here in the diaspora, it's two. So you're eating both days, right? So it's a little bit different. You're doing the mitzvah on both days. חד, אבל בחוץ לארץ דאבדיה תראה יומי תווה, כי איך דלא נפיק על ידי חובתה במצה שירה בלילה קמייתא, הכי נמי לא נפיק בלילה תניא, דכל המצוות הנוהגות בלילה ראשון, נוהגות בלילה השני. So he says, right, that when it comes to the diaspora, you got to do the same thing the second night as you did the first night, no? Like a copycat, carbon copy. So whatever you did there, you got to do the same thing over here. So, then, right, obviously, it all applies, right, what we just said. Okay, good. לכל מצוות אלא כיוון דאיקרא מצווה אינה אלא לילה ראשון. This is another way to answer it is like this. Another way to explain it. That since the main mitzvah is really the first night, levad, really the first night, ומה שאנו מצליחים לאכול מצה בשני לילות, is that which we required to eat also the second night. אינו אלא מפני שאנו מסופקים איזו הוא הלילה הראשון. Because we're not really sure, right, which is the first night of Passover. Today we are, but in those days it was like that. So he says, therefore, right, the first two nights are really like the one long day, basically. So he says these two rabbis went according to the language of the Gemara. That's what the Torah said. The first night, and the second night, and you'll see in the main day. We can't fill the obligation with the right for the matzah. וכן כתב גם כן רבנו ירוחם. Rabbi Yerucham also says this. Okay, so I guess we'll do the Shulchan Aruch. We'll stop there. This was pretty long. This Bet Yosef was quite long, but it's okay. We knocked it off. Okay, very good. So here we go. Shulchan Aruch, right? So says Shulchan Aruch, me perot belo mayim en machmitzin klal. So right, as we said, right, the accepted opinion is, right, even though we found several opinions over there, but if you're using, right, as we said, if you're using fruit juice, right, without any additional water, it doesn't leaven at all. This is the halacha. It says, even if you left it all day, right, like, the dough, right, like that, it won't leaven. So you can still eat it, even though you left it 24 hours like that. So that's the way we hold, right? But he says you don't fulfill your obligation for the mitzvah, right? As we said. Why is that? Because this is called rich matzah, right? But we require for the mitzvah, we require the poor man's matzah. So therefore, right, we say you can eat that stuff all you want, but not for the mitzvah. For the mitzvah, you have to have the poor man's matzah, which is made out of water. Okay, that's the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what else we got here. All right, so we'll do also bet right here. Whatever, yeah, we can read this. So he says, right, that if you're using fruit juice together with the water to knead the dough, so that causes it to leaven even faster. And so you got to watch out. Right? So he says, therefore, what you should do is not use that, right, to knead. Fruit juice and water together. As we said, right, if your fruit juice is concentrate, you can't use that. That's what we're saying. But says Maran, right, but that's lechatchila, you shouldn't use it. But if he did knead with it, right, what should he do? Bake it right away, like we said in the Rosh, right? So that's the halacha. The halacha is like the Rosh, who says you bake it right away. So that prevents any problem, right? Why is that? Because it won't leaven, It's if you put it in right away, it should be no problem. So there you go, right? That's the story. Okay, so the question is like this, right? You have to ask now a question, obvious question. Why doesn't the Ramah here bring, the Ashkenazi custom, which is not to eat, right, matzah shira? Why doesn't he bring it over here? So the truth is, right, that because here he's talking about, the properties of matzah shira, which means it never leavens. So you see from there that the Rama agrees, also that matzah shirat never leavens. Right? So the reason why the Ashkenazim don't eat it it's not because it gets leavened, according to their opinion, but they're just afraid, right, that they're going to mix water with it, and then it's going to leaven very fast. This is the reason why they don't eat it. So, right, that's the custom. We're going to see that probably later on, right, in the Ramah. He's going to talk about that, whatever. So that's the story, right? Okay, so I guess we'll stop there. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow. Bezat Hashem, be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Thank you so much, Kavod.
God bless.